So thanks everyone for joining. We've got quite a crowd. I wanted to start out with a dad joke because I've been told that that's appropriate. And it's also the number one feedback item I get in my SAFE courses, that I need new material, which is kind of hurtful. But so I actually remembered a bunch of dad jokes and then I forgot them right when I walked in the room. So instead I just decided to bring one. See, it's a terrible dad joke. So today we're going to be talking about a story that we experienced at NASA and a lot of consulting work and learning that we did with them on the topic of connecting strategy to execution. So we'll dive right in and we will get into the details. There's going to be some disclosures and some other setup work, but please feel free to ask questions. I'd love to actually have a conversation and save some time at the end of the discussion. So, is it not? Okay, that's better, sorry. So, we worked with NASA's Office of the CIO on strategy development within their applications and platform services service line, which is akin to what we call a portfolio in SAFE. And the work that we initially did led to further investments in time and energy with their strategy and architecture office. And what this allowed us to do is actually build a model to help them connect enterprise strategy to execution down within the team levels. So we'll explore that. There are three objectives for the talk today. How do we actually express OKRs with a goal-setting framework in that connection to strategy, to that story, visualizing that with a model, and then ultimately creating a goal-setting framework that can be utilized for visualization of the communication channels that need to occur within that model. So as far as NASA, I am not representing NASA today. I was a consultant with the agency. So everything that you're going to hear today is all about my personal experience with NASA. For some context, we've been consulting NASA since 2019 within their OCIO and other parts of the missions and agency. The LPM adoption, Lean Portfolio Management adoption, began within NASA OCIO, and then it grew out of that into other parts of the agency. So we had the opportunity about a year into this process to actually pair with a new group that was created within the OCIO that works across the business side of NASA and connections to the mission side in what they call the MSD, or Mission Support Directorate, which was called the Strategy and Architecture Office. The specifics with regard to how we engaged at that local level within the applications and platform services service line became really relevant in the conversations that we developed with the customer, and we're going to expand on that as we move forward, because we actually pulled in their current and previous strategy documents. Many of you in the audience today work for companies that have strategy documents. And we're going to pull some of those examples up to show the importance of actually visualizing that connection and being able to act and connect to the work being done through that strategy. So there are two documents that are referenced here. NASA's agency strategic plan, as well as the OCIO strategic plan, which is referential to that document. And then an important concept around NASA's performance evidence framework that we adopted as part of this exercise. So we'll jump right into strategy and what is it. So one of the first things that we learned in the process is leaders didn't have a common language or a shared understanding of what the language was around strategy. Strategy meant different things to different people. So as we would do empathy interviews and we would do workshops, we ran into a real problem with use of language around strategy, goals, and objectives as words. So the very first problem that we had to solve was to build a baseline of understanding for what these words actually meant. So we had a little fun and we went directly to the internet and Merriam-Webster's website, and we asked the Merriam brothers to define those words for us. And that was the baseline of that discussion and that creation of shared understanding. This became really important, again, because if we are creating OKRs and strategic themes in SAFE, and SAFE has specific guidance around that language, organizations at the enterprise level may or may not be using SAFE, but we do need to communicate with enterprise executives and create alignment across the entire organization. So we felt that it was important to establish that common language. So we defined the words. We said, this is what strategy is. It's a careful plan. It's a story, as we'll learn. We also went through and defined what the word goal meant and what the differentiation was between the word objective and strategy. We also visualized that concept, as you can see here on the slide, so that people could have further understanding in that communication model. It's important to note that objectives and relationship to each other, but objectives ultimately move us toward the end, toward that goal. And this was a language that we agreed on as a working group. Ultimately, this resulted in the working agreement. And the working agreement was established in the PM course, and then consequently the folks that were stakeholders in the LPM function within that OCIO group. We then were able to actually tie strategy development at the local level within the portfolio to enterprise strategy. And we'll talk a little bit about NASA's mission, which many of you are, more specifically, their strategic goals and strategic objectives and how they tied into OCIO and then local portfolio strategy. So once we were there, we had a place to start with actual construction of strategic themes, OKRs, and local strategy. So a key point in the learning journey with the client, once we had the basis, was there was still a missing element of how do we actually get beyond just the words, but build a way to communicate with folks across the agency, people that are not in IT, not in the software business, people that are supporting the Artemis mission, or Orion, or the International Space Station, or a business function within the agency. And that led to the creation of a goal-setting framework. But there was some setup and understanding that we had to have as well in our efforts for leaders in the agency and the local group to meet with other parts of the agency to begin to establish those connections and language. So it requires leadership. This took a tremendous amount of effort from agency assistant CIOs, center CIOs, managers, directors across the stakeholder group that we're working in to build the opportunities to have these discussions. This ultimately led to creation of this goal-setting framework and the ability for them to actually translate goal language into strategy, into strategic objectives, and then ultimately into OKRs, or strategic themes, in the skeletal framework. So there was a useful model that we used from Michael Watkins that helped us to create barriers between the what and the how, the why, in regards to the model. Because it became very challenging when any new person that you involve in the new agreement has to understand and have an entry point into the conversation. So using a model like this, the Watkins model, enabled us to separate NASA mission and goals from OCIO goals as the what, and then really make strategy that story about how we're going to get there. For NASA, that's an inspirational story, for example, about how are we going to put people on Mars. So that has to be then translated into actionable efforts within the applications and platform service line, for example, or a financial management group within NASA, or one of the missions themselves that might be working on software for the International Space Station. So the model helped us to give clarity to the goal-setting framework that we created. So we ran into another problem. Many leaders had attended and been aware of or received training or read books on strategy. And it turns out that there are a lot of opinions about what strategy is. So we dusted off a lot of books and we did a lot of research in this. The conclusion that we came to is you really just need to pick one. Because there's a lot of strong opinions about what strategy is and how to differentiate and how to build models, but we had to pick a place to start, a place that we could act from. So pick something that works for your organization, that works within your culture, that is easy to translate into the language of your organization. And we had a great starting point. When Bill Nelson took over at NASA as the administrator, there was very shortly after a 2022 NASA strategic document that was published. It's available on NASA's website. If you'd like to go and read it, it's all yours. So the first thing that we did when this document came out, because we had the other documents that were referenced, was begin to walk through the documents and understand how we could help the customer, our customer in APS, if you will, build connections to NASA enterprise strategy. And there was a key thing that we noticed in the documents. There's a great story there. For example, in this strategic objective 4.2, transform mission support capabilities for the next era of air. There's great objectives listed in this story, but there were not very specific ways for us to measure progress towards those objectives. And this is a key element that's missing. It's also a critical reason why OKRs and OKR frameworks have become very popular, because they're useful for us to tie objectives and key results together as we navigate towards achieving goals. So the framework was really missing. And we needed a way to help the strategy and architecture office and help our customer in APS to create a model that would be easy to communicate and also actionable in terms of building safe epics and features down in the arts, et cetera, that could build value for the customers. So we created the goal setting framework. This is a model. It's a pattern that might be useful for all of you to begin with. I don't suggest necessarily copy and pasting this. You may need to create something that is very specific and unique to your organization. This is what worked for us to establish that common language and to help the customers to have a conversation about how we actually can connect people that are working at the enterprise level on enterprise strategy to the folks that are actually doing work. And this model was the beginning of the learning process. Once we were able to move past understanding how the pieces to the puzzle fit together, the teams actually got to work on writing and defining vision, strategy, and then ultimately strategic themes and OKRs within their safe implementation. So there's a great quote from John Doerr in the book Measure What Matters, which is part of the reference here for this talk. It's also the inspiration for our goal setting framework, is that ideas are easy, but execution is everything. And for many of you, and you probably have experienced this, and I experienced it as a consultant, I talk to people who are doing work in IT, software, or business functions, even doing transactions in a financial management system. And almost every single time when I ask the question, how is your work connected to the strategy of the organization? Most people can't answer the question. And that is kind of the fundamental problem that we're trying to address here, is that if we don't understand the connection of our work within an art or an app team to the strategy of the organization, then there's something missing. And we need to be able to execute better than that. So this visualization, this version of the model that we use with NASA, with a few more details in the our learning. There's a visualization here of all the dotted lines. That's feedback. And feedback is critical in any organization. But what we observed is that feedback within the local context of an agile release train is not truly adequate to ultimately achieve the goals of the agency. So we have to directly connect the goals of NASA exploring space for the benefit of the United States and humankind, for example. How do we connect that aspirational goal to the work being done within the Agile release train? This is a model that helped NASA and helped the tool and technology to develop a tool, as well as the communication and process models, et cetera, to actually realize this value and be able to take advantage of this connection. Ultimately, the goal is, as we know in SAFE, to establish and sustain flow. So when we think about value stream KPIs, and we think about OKRs as a framework, and sustaining flow for the long term, one of the ways in which we can apply lean thinking is exactly through this model. Because when we build those enterprise connections between goals and strategy and the people doing the work, we can apply all the rest of the principles in the framework as well. So this led us to visualizing the actual systems model. Because we needed more than the 5 or 6 steps there in the goal setting framework. And this model that we're going to share here in a moment became really important as a design tool, but also as a communication tool to help us to build those connections with the rest of the organization. So a few months ago, I was teaching an Implementing SAFE course with Richard Naster, and he said something really important in the course that I thought was impactful to my talk here today. And it's been something that we've been wrestling with for quite a while in SAFE. And that is, what is the difference between a strategic theme and strategy? Or is there a difference? And it turns out that there is a difference. And Richard put it best, and it's a quote, "Strategic themes without a strategy are just dreams. Only when you have your strategy do your objectives have meaning and aim." And this is why I used the language earlier when I said that strategy is the story about how we're going to achieve our goals. And from the perspective of the framework, it has accommodations for this in strategic themes. And you'll see in the model, we actually propose a visualization of how we can realize this. So this is very busy, and I don't want everyone to stop and look down, but I'd like to walk through this with you guys for a few minutes. This is a simplified version of the model that we use at NASA. As I mentioned earlier, we started with NASA's 2022 strategic document. And NASA already had, which to our great benefit, we were just able to adopt it, a performance evidence framework that gave us language that already existed in the culture. So adopting this language worked perfectly with SAFE's model for lean portfolio management and using portfolio SAFE. And so we were able to actually model out in detail. We extracted all the information from the documents and put it into a model in Mural, the tool that we used. And from the vision statement, the culture and the culture book, the culture statements, to those strategic goals. Like, go back to John F. Kennedy's speech, for example, about going to the moon. Those things were able to be directly connected to the model visually through the language of vision, strategic goals, which are inspirational statements, goal statements, which are the details of those focus themes, strategic, which is where the business agility value stream in SAFE interacts in the model. As you can see, operational value streams, which are a critical element we define in the framework, and then SAFE portfolios. So the model became clearer as we navigated through the learning process with our customers and the SAO and that service line. So as we built out this model, we were also simultaneously going through a tooling implementation. Many of you are using Agile Lifecycle Management tools in your organizations, perhaps like Jira, and the teams are using Jira. But just like at many of our client organizations, we may have some strategic themes that are defined in an IT-centric or a development-centric point of view. But we ask some questions, as I alluded to earlier. How do these IT-centric or development-centric strategic themes connect directly to enterprise strategy? And it was hard for folks to answer. Some of the leaders, they really couldn't give a definitive answer to that question. So using this model in combination with actually building out the configuration and the tools, we were able to actually do working sessions to create effective strategy as well as strategy modeling using this systems model. So when you went into the tool at that point, someone from the Mission Support Directorate or the Artemis program could go into the tool and they could directly see the connections and walk the model down from NASA Vision, which many of us are familiar with, all the way down to a user story on an individual Agile team. And that was a very powerful story. This result enabled the Strategy and Architecture Office to get more funding to fund more development and more connections across the entire enterprise. So I wanted to note a couple of things about this model that are really important. One is that we can have what we're calling portfolios of portfolios. And many complex organizations, like our clients, the Department of Veterans Affairs, they have many complex portfolios that serve both hospital functions, health functions for veterans, as well as IT functions, financial management functions, et cetera. NASA is very similar. Enterprise clients, again, there are often very many portfolios in large, complex organizations. So this model actually can be scaled out to fit any complexity in the organization by having multiple safe portfolios or portfolios within the portfolios, serving one or more operational value streams across an enterprise. Another thing that we did in the model that was really important, and perhaps a little bit passive aggressive, is that we put a big question mark around key results. Because we wanted not just strategy, but we wanted true strategy. What is the how that gets us to that differentiating view of the future? Because very often we see that strategy simply documents where we are today, and that's not strategy. That's just a document that documents your operating model. So by making it a point to demand that we put effort towards documenting key results, it enabled people to have those conversations to really focus in on what a good objective and key result or an OKR is. So there are key points, as you can see here with the black circles, where the key results feedback loop, or results loop as we call them, was able to actually channel back and connect ultimately to enterprise strategy, which is on the top left in the gold box. So how do we actually do that? The systems model was useful, and we know how to do SAFe, but how often do we actually have in large organizations like NASA, 50, 60, 100,000 people or more, are we really expecting Bill Nelson to go to PI planning events? Well, if we have dozens and dozens of arts, he'd be a very busy man, right? It'd be logistically impossible. So we thought about what does a realistic approach look like? And we came up with what we're calling the Enterprise Portfolio Sync. There could be other language for that. That's just where we landed. And this is a new event, but it's not an additional event. And we'll talk more about that. But the Enterprise Portfolio Sync, for example, in our guidance and our suggestions, begins with Gemba. So any of you that have read Lean books, Gemba is a critical element of Lean. And there's a lot of really awesome quotes that we use in the SAFe training material from Dr. Deming, Taiichi Ohno, et cetera. Like if you can't come, bring no one, for example. Well, this really applies here as well. Because if we want to get meaningful, high performance execution from teams, we have to connect the inspiration from those strategic goals and that vision for the future to the actual people who are doing the work, and not have it only delivered through an email or only delivered through a cold recorded town hall, but actually delivered in person, person to person, face to face. So the Enterprise Portfolio Sync is an opportunity to do that. And I'm going to expand on that a lot more because I don't have enough time to go over that in an article that you will have access to after this talk. So I did put in some examples that are out of the original NASA model that we extracted from that strategic document. You can see here in this example, we have NASA agency strategic goals, which are defined in the document. And the themes were very simple. You know, they had a handful of themes for each one of their strategic goals. In this example, discover. So discover might seem innocuous, but in the context of NASA, it's extremely important, because who doesn't want to be able to get on a spaceship, right, sometime in our generation and visit Mars maybe, right? Not everybody does. It'd be cool. And then there are goal statements which expand on that inspirational theme and further executing that communication, which are then modeled into strategic objectives in the performance evidence framework. And there are things like understand the sun, solar system, and universe. It's a great strategic objective, perhaps, but is it actionable, or is it too broad? So I'm not going to speak to the quality of my client's strategy here on stage when it's being recorded, but you know, nothing's perfect. So the one thing that we did like, and it was very valuable to us, is this strategic document gave us the story, and it gave us a language, and it accelerated our ability to connect the model that we implement with SAFE within an Agile release train to their strategic model or their performance evidence framework. So you guys can review this document if you wish as well. It's all publicly available. But these goal statements, again, they're further expansion on the inspirational vision for the future that is really important for communicating the how to the people that are doing the work. So another discussion, connecting things is great, but what is actually valuable? Besides understanding the language of strategy and objectives and goals, we also had to understand what was actually valuable. There's actually a lot of talks here today. One of my coworkers, Joe Vergara, he's going to be doing a talk later about value. So I recommend that you guys attend those talks as well to get some further inspiration. But we did spend a considerable amount of time helping the customer to define what their products and services were. Because often we go in and we say, well, what are your customers buying? And we get a spreadsheet of 1,000 things. There might be 1,000 things on Amazon, but in most of our customer contexts, they're not buying 1,000 things. There are more definitive products and services that are actually being sold as solutions in the marketplace of that organization. So we had a lot of discussions about that, and we wrote it down. Does everybody agree that this is what is valuable? This is our products, these are our services, and these are our solutions. We connected those through OKRs and the demos, as I mentioned in the model earlier. What is valuable and where does it fit in that model? And then lastly, we worked on creating a taxonomy. And the taxonomy was a communication mechanism so that people could look to the dictionary, if you will, of the categorization of what is valuable and how that model works, so that it was transportable to other parts of the organization. So the last part of this talk is about tools. The tools become very important because if you're doing this manually, it takes a tremendous amount of effort. It'd be very cumbersome. There's a lot of great tools out there. We're partnered with a lot of the tooling partners. You're going to need something at enterprise scale in order to manage the data, enable automation, AI, machine learning, big data, et cetera. So a critical element of having a successful enterprise strategy sync, right, is using tooling to help communicate at the right level in the right context. So managing the results loops as well is extremely complicated. Our intention with this model is not to relabel existing PMO events like the PMR into this new enterprise strategy sync, for example, that we invite perhaps different stakeholders to. This event is actually meant to replace current events in your enterprise activities schedule to build those real connections, and as I mentioned, using Gemba. So you could repurpose town halls, you could repurpose other types of events, and reinvent those to build those direct connections to execution in your organization. So I've written a blog article that expands on this. You guys can access the slides later in your app, and it's also available and already published on the Agile Rising website. So there were 3 key takeaways, and we'll have some time left for questions. Building a collaborative stakeholder working agreement. It's not enough to verbally agree. It's really important, just like it is for an Agile team, to actually write their working agreements down and make them in a transportable fashion. Make it part of the LACES communication tools, for example, your Lean Agile Center of Excellence. Any stakeholder groups that you're working with, bring them and invite them into the process of actually creating that goal-setting framework so that everyone can have a shared understanding across the stakeholder groups. Visualize that through a model. Again, it's part of the communication mechanism. And then lastly, create opportunities for meaningful interaction. Not just one-way communication through town halls or recorded events or big room events where nobody gets to interact. And so with that, we have some time for questions. Patrick?
All right. Yeah, and a reminder, if you want to ask questions, you can go to the mobile app and find the session, and at the bottom there will be an area where you can ask your Q&A questions. If you want to display the questions on the screen there. Great. And so the first one that actually came up is more of just a handy reminder, but can you remind people they have access to the slide deck in the app and the information about the talk? Yes, if you did not know that, this talk and almost every session actually has the slide deck attached to it inside of the mobile app. So if you want to download it there or go review it, you have access to all that inside the mobile app.
Yep, so great question. So where does vision fit into this model? It was on the top left of the systems model. Everything starts with a vision. Otherwise your organization doesn't exist or where they're going. Just like the keynote today, there has to be an influential leader or an influential statement or a message about what the future is. So it does fit into the model, the systems model, to connect up with the rest of the elements. Did we use it? Yes. So, any other questions?
So how do you help a client find actionable results from a strategic objective as broad as understanding the universe?
Yeah, so I knew there were a lot of landmines in using NASA's as an example. So, you know, when you work at NASA, it is exciting, like the energy's there, like, you know, I work at NASA, that's cool. But at some point you actually have to do real work. We spent a lot of time decomposing these statements into actionable key results, which is why, you know, I did the big question mark thing. And there's a lot to this. It's not as easy just going to an executive saying, yeah, your strategy's great, but, like, you can't use the but word, right? So we had to spend a lot of time working with the strategy and architecture office to influence and invite executives to add more details that were actionable so that we could tie those to definitive key results in the OKR framework. And it was a lot of work. So.
Great. Next question is, how long did it take you to complete this working with the client? Did you have change agents at NASA that helped to build momentum?
Yeah, really good question. So we started out in 2019 with the origins of their digital transformation. We began work on the LPM implementation roughly 1 year into that transformation. And this entire process of actually creating the LPM function within that portfolio and then tying it into our partner when we paired with the strategy and architecture office is actually still going on today. But it was about a 2-year process. And did we have change agents? Yes. One of the things that we do in the framework is enlist the volunteer army. Not only did we have Agile Rising change agents, like my wonderful coworker, Michelle Warner, and other folks, but we enlisted change agents across the agency. Anybody that was willing to listen and that could possibly influence change became a potential change agent for us to work towards this goal of connecting strategy to execution. So there were innumerable people. So.
Great. The next question is, how did you track and measure the OKRs?
So it's a great question as well. So we measure the OKRs by the key results. Those actually have to be actionable, as you know. We sometimes wind up with OKRs that are a little bit amorphous and not really sticky, and they're not actionable by people. So we need to make sure that we're doing the hard work to define OKRs that are actionable in the context of that particular team or Agile release train, et cetera. And the way we measured them is through, to simply we call them check-ins in NASA context. So check-ins occur as a result of systems demo and achievement of PI objectives, for example. So you delivered something valuable. Does it support that objective? Yes or no? You're all familiar with SMART when we write PI objectives, so it's a similar type of a model. The tooling was extremely helpful with this. There are tools that are available in the marketplace that actually support this function of check-ins, which makes things a lot easier because you can also aggregate multiple value generating activities to higher level strategic objectives and OKRs. And the tools take care of all the metrics for you and everything as well, which is obviously super helpful.
And the next question is, do you have any best practices toward making the leap to realistic objectives and specific measurable results?
Man, I thought you guys were going to be nice to me today. Yeah, so probably number one, be a good facilitator. Even though you may feel as a consultant, a safe practice consultant, an SPC, like you know the answer, or as an Agile coach, it's not our job to give them the answer every time. So we really, as facilitators, establish a safe place for people to come together to actually create an environment where this can happen. Because oftentimes what we find, if you have the wrong stakeholders in the room, we don't get to the answers that we want because of politics or because of the relationship between those people, et cetera, et cetera. So we spent a lot of time on using what we create an influencer matrix, and we do incentive modeling, and we understand the relationships between people in the organization, and we work the tree. So we work up the tree, and we work down the tree, and we work left and right on the tree so that we can build that common ground for everybody to get to the place where they can actually make realistic OKRs that are not making everybody stressed out at the team level because they're never going to be achievable, versus something that is actionable that will give us reasonable feedback with the fast feedback concept that we all know and love, and make it meaningful to the organization as well.
Great. We should have time for a couple more questions. How did leaders prioritize conflicting themes or account for unattached work?
So another really great question. So there's something, we of course have WSJF and SAFE. We have prioritization techniques built into the framework. What was really important and a great learning experience for us is that NASA's performance evidence framework actually has a concept called priority questions. And this was more at the strategic level, but from a format perspective, it's very different than WSJF. And to summarize it here in the short time we have, Like, what questions are you going to ask about how to prioritize this work in relation to everything else? So it's a discussion-based format that is related to the strategy as documented in that performance evidence framework. So it's a discussion about strategies, strategic objectives, strategic goals.
Great. And last question will be, what tool or tools was used by NASA?
It was an Atlassian tool called Align, as well as Jira.
Great, and that's all the time we have for questions, so let's give a big hand for Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you.